Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Happy 2022. For those of you that I haven't seen, good morning. My name is Alyssa Norwood, and I'm a program manager with Sustainable CT, and I'm so glad that you're here. I want to start out with what I hope you'll find to be a little bit of inspiration. So Lynn Stoddard, our executive director, shared this article this morning. I just put it in the chat. But it's titled Imagine It's 2030 and Net Zero is on Track. How did we do it? So at your leisure, feel free to take a look at the article, but it's written in the past tense from the year 2030, reflecting on what's happened in the past 8 years in this fictitious time travel in terms of what we did to get to net zero. So if that excites you, it's a fun read. I hope you enjoy it. And we're a large group, so traditional introductions won't work, but I'm going to ask folks if you don't mind, wherever your Zoom square is, if you hover over it on the top right-hand corner, you'll see 3 dots. And if you click on them and scroll down, there's an option to rename. If in addition to your name, you could also hyphen afterwards and just put what town or organization you're from. That way, if folks click on the participant pad, they'll know where you're from, and you all can talk amongst yourselves or talk to the group knowing what your professional affiliation is. And then the last thing I'm going to ask you to do after you've made the change in terms of where you're from is if you could click on the chat function and just type a brief word or phrase around what inspires you. So you're all here doing this sustainability work. What inspires you or excites you about it so that you can share with the group and ground ourselves in the why of why you're doing this important and amazing work. So I'll let the chat light up, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. My hope is that we're going to bifurcate this meeting into 2 pieces. So part of it is going to be me talking at you, and hopefully the information that I share you'll find valuable and useful. But I'd also really like this to serve as a space for answering whatever questions you have. So we'll see how far we get. We have a hard stop scheduled for 11. But if folks need to go, you can. If it seems like it would be value for us to continue a little bit, I'm happy to stay on and answer continued questions. So hopefully you're in the right place. This is about Sustainable CT certification, new and improved for 2022. So we might have some folks who are certifying for the first time this year, others who have begun work on an application or might previously have been certified. So from all those different perspectives, we're going to talk about the certification process. So first off, I just wanted to ground you all in the timeline. For folks who are new, or perhaps for folks who haven't engaged in certification for a while, a couple of years ago, we used to have one opportunity each year to earn certification, and recognizing that having a more frequent opportunity for you to apply for certification would be useful. We now have 2 opportunities each year. One is in the spring, one is in the fall. So if you're interested in pursuing certification for either of those cycles, the deadlines are listed here. The first is April 5th by noon. And the deadlines are just that, they're deadlines. If you have a desire to submit early, that's great. So this is the back end of a window of opportunity anytime from now till April 5th at noon for spring certification. And fall certification, the deadline is August 23rd at noon. So what that means is simply that we assemble a team of expert reviewers from across the state who will thoroughly review your application in whatever stage of readiness it's in. So it might be that you have a fully completed application and you're interested in having it reviewed because you think you've met the criteria for certification, or it could be that you've just gotten started on a few actions in a few categories, but you'd like to know how you're doing and where you are. So any state of readiness is welcome. So we highly encourage folks, if you've begun work on your application, but even if it's not complete yet, to submit for the April deadline. So you've noted these here. We can talk a little bit more about what happens through the process of certification as we move through the slides. But later this year, all communities will be recognized in a couple of different ways. So for those of you who are familiar with Sustainable CT, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities has its annual meeting, and there's a lunchtime opportunity, really high visibility for mayors and for selectmen to get honored. But we also recognize that pursuing certification is a really multifaceted endeavor, and there are lots of people who help in the process. So new this year is we'll be reaching out across the state to our existing certified communities, both from 2021 as well as 2020, because COVID put a real damper on the opportunity to properly recognize people and identify opportunities to have a celebration in your community, on your home turf, with your residents and all the members of your sustainability team who might have celebrated. So our hope is to do that not just for those who are already certified, but also going forward with 2022 certified communities. So in terms of what the requirements are, current certification requirements for the moment are unchanged. They're the same as they were in 2018 when we first launched. There are 2 levels of certification available. One is bronze and one is silver, and each has 3 requirements. Equity is a huge foundation of our program. So the first requirement is that every certified community has to complete at least 1 equity toolkit in our Optimize for Equity action. There are other webinars and other opportunities for us to delve more deeply into that topic, but needless to say, it's something that you should start on early. And we encourage you to email info@sustainablecT.org, which is the email address listed up here, to get connected with an equity coach who will offer free consultative support to your town in navigating that process. So at least 1 equity toolkit's required for bronze and 3 are required for silver. We also have 12 different action categories. And for those who haven't visited Sustainable CT in a while, this is a larger list of categories than previously. We used to have 9 plus our innovation category. Now we have 12 plus our innovation category. So towns have to complete at least 1 action in each of the categories. You get to choose which, and you get to choose how much you do. It could just be 1 piece of an action worth only 5 points, or it could be a really significant lift, but to make sure there's breadth in the application. And then each action has a certain point total associated with it. So in total, all of your approved actions have to total at least 200 points for bronze and 400 for silver. So this is an exciting moment in our program because a lot of people have asked us about gold. When is gold coming? So this is the year that we're going to be developing gold. There'll be more opportunities for you to inform that process. We envision having a space sort of like this one, but rather than presentation, it'll be much more conversational to brainstorm collectively and hear from you about what gold should look like. But in the meantime, if you're really burning with great ideas, you can email that same email address, put the word gold somewhere in the subject line. But if you have a thought on what it is a town should do to earn gold level certification as we define the requirements to be able to launch next year for 2023 certification, let us know, and we'd love to hear from you. We also have a new opportunity this year. We're piloting what's called our climate leader designation. So there'll be more opportunities to learn about this specifically. That's not the topic of today's webinar, but you'll see if you go on our website, you'll be able to access information directly from our homepage, but the URL is also here at the bottom of the page. But basically, it's a special designation that doesn't require you to do anything beyond the normal certification process, but certain key actions with high impact on influencing climate change have been identified through a highly collaborative process. And for towns that meet the requirement within their existing application, so certain actions that you successfully complete, you can be identified as a climate leader. So again, more on that in other spaces, and happy to answer questions about that at the end. But I wanted to let you know that that's an option and available, and it's in its pilot year this year. The last thing I wanted to show you before we dig into the nuts and bolts of sustainability is, many of you probably know, on our website, if you go to the top of the homepage, there's a tab that says support for your town. And under support for your town, there's a page called Sustainability Team Guidance. These are screenshots of just two small pieces, but if you haven't checked it out lately, this is filled with a wealth of information. And the two sections in particular I wanted to highlight, there's one called Resources for Your Team. All of these documents are up to date to the year 2022. We think if we've missed something, please let us know. And then there are also a number of video tutorials that we created last year to talk about various programmatic changes. All of these videos are anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes. So they're really bite-sized pieces. We're obviously here to help you in any way we can. Feel free to call, email any of the staff. But we do encourage you to check here, because if you have a really specific question about how to use your dashboard, or how do you navigate the documents that are up here, or how do I follow this changing of structure, since when I last applied there were 9 categories and now there were 12. All of this is explained here. So feel free to take a look and hopefully it's useful. So again, I mentioned there are a lot of different applicants here, so I'm going to speak from a number of different lenses. So this first lens is kind of a conversation around what all applicants need to do, including first-time applicants. And by the way, in addition to the recording, these slides will be posted, so you don't need to too feverishly take notes. If it's helpful to you, feel free, but you'll have all of this after the webinar is over. So I already mentioned the first thing that you should do, no matter what, whether you're reapplying or applying for the first time, is to take a look at category 1 of our program and review action 1.1, our equity action called Optimize for Equity, and email info@sustainablect.org to get support for implementing that action, since it's really the foundation of everything. After you've done that, your sustainability team should meet to review actions in the program and start marking potential actions as planned. So the way people complete their application is usually there are 2 different possibilities and variations on a theme. Either your town has already done something great and it fits into an action that's on Sustainable CT's list, or there's something on the list that your town hadn't previously considered or hasn't completed yet that you'll then proactively pursue to earn points. So whether or not you do that holistically as a group, or whether or not individual sustainability team members take on different pieces or categories for a first pass, but to do an audit and think about what has my town already done, or what are the things that my town is thinking about doing. And you'll go through your application and you'll mark all of those things as planned. The default is unplanned if you haven't previously engaged with Sustainable CT. So that's kind of on a first pass. The next thing you'll do is you'll see when you click the various actions, they all are very detailed, hopefully in a way that's helpful to you. And there's submission requirements under each of the action steps. So you'll take a look at the detailed requirements, because maybe your town has a complete streets policy, but then you'll take a look at the detailed requirements and see that there are certain aspects that are required to be in the policy for it to get points. These are all best practices that have been co-created with municipal input as well as expert stakeholders. So hopefully you'll find it valuable. And if there's something that's not in your town's complete streets policy, you might want to consider amending and incorporating the requirements to be able to get points in Sustainable CT, or not. And you'll move on and you'll look at other ways to get points in the transportation category. After you do that is the process of beginning to compile all of the various documents. Each town operates differently, and there might be different levels of documentation. There might be the creation of certain documents necessary. This phase is really important in the peer learning component. So part of the reason that we ask people to be so transparent if they created a complete streets policy, to not just tell us that, but to post it, is the Sustainable CT website is searchable by action. So for every single action in the program, you can see the successful work of every other town. So your work in doing this is paying it forward and helping up build this amazing library of resources, as well as showcasing to your residents and anybody else who views your Sustainable CT application what your town has done to promote sustainability. Next on the list is tracking progress. So we're going to show you where all of these things are, but we have something called an action overview worksheet. For those who haven't participated in the program in a few years, it used to be called the Master Action Spreadsheet. We've renamed it. but basically it's a Excel spreadsheet that in short form lists all the actions, and you can choose to use it if you want or not, but allows you to track your progress from identifying it as something that you might want to pursue in the program, versus how far along you are in actually having a completed submission. The other thing I wanted to mention in this whole process, so I said, consider the public facing portal. So remember that as you put your submission together, it's not just for the folks who were reviewing your application. It'll be publicly posted on the Sustainable CT website. So part of the way you want to put your application together is to think about what you want the world to see. So consider that public facing piece. And then I mentioned, if you go to the Sustainable CT website, on the bottom left, there's a picture of a map that says participating communities. If you click on it, and again, we'll walk through all of this, there's a way to look and see what other communities have done. So to use this complete streets example, let's say your community hasn't really considered or pursued complete streets. And I also don't want to presume, for those who don't know what that phrase means, it's the idea of creating a streetscape that considers all users, so not just cars. Is my community navigable for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for people with assistive mobility devices? So it's a really holistic way of thinking about navigating your community. So let's say you haven't thought much about it as a community. If you filter by the Complete Streets action, you can see all of the work that other towns have done. And that might be a great starting point for learning as your town undertakes its own journey. And then the very last thing you'll do is you'll change your status to completed from planned. That doesn't do anything. Nothing happens until you click submit. But one, it lets all of the folks who might be inputting data into your application know that that action is done. It's ready for submission. And two, on the day that you do click submit, the only thing that Sustainable CT will see is something clicked completed. So let's say you have something that you feel like you're not ready for us to look at yet, you would keep the status as planned for that action. And then something you wanted submitted for review, you'd change to completed. So I know there's a lot of information and I'm going fast. So I'm going to ask folks, as you have questions, because I want to make sure I get through all the material, hold them all and we'll talk at the end, but make sure you jot them down because I really want to hear what you're curious or confused about. So the next piece of our conversation, I wanted to talk about annual changes. So Sustainable CT is a living program. It was created in 2018 and launched then. Many of you participated in the creation and drafting of the actions, and every year we learn. There are new emerging best practices, or maybe we'll review a town submission and we'll discover it was fabulous, but because of the way the action was drafted, we couldn't give points for it, or we'll hear from a town something's too hard or too easy. So every year we compile all of these comments, we go through them all, we ask our reviewers what they think should change in the way the actions are drafted. So once a year, we change our action write-ups. Some of them don't change, some of them do, and they don't change substantially, and some of them change quite a lot. So now I'm speaking to the folks who have previously applied to Sustainable CT or who might have pursued certification in a previous year, and whether you were successful or not. Anyone who has an application that was underway prior to this year, it's going to be important for you to understand and navigate what's changed, because maybe something that got points in 2019, if you just let all of your materials sit there and ride into the next certification cycle without looking at the action right specific to 2022, won't get points because you'll have missed an update. So if you go to the Sustainable CT website, there are lots of materials. It's not your job to view them all. You should think of this as a reference library and just pull things off the shelf when you need them, and to not feel overwhelmed and like you have to read everything. But these are all resources that are available to you. So if you go to the Sustainable CT website, at the top, you'll see a tab that says Actions and Certifications. One of the subcomponents on that tab says Updates and Past Actions. It'll bring you to this page, and there are two different places that you can go. One is an archive library of all of our past actions organized by year. So let's say you last applied in 2019. You could go ahead, look at the write-up there, and then compare it to what's on the website now. We also, year by year, will mark up in track changes, what's changed from year to year. So you have a lot of different ways at a really granular level if you're interested to see what's changed. And then on the left, the action change summaries. Every year we put together a slide deck where we summarize what's changed. Some of the changes, again, I mentioned might be really significant where there are new components to the action. Some of them might be really small clarifying edits. And some of them might be that we have new submission requirements where maybe submissions were really confusing to the reviewers and disorganized. So we created a new worksheet where a town just simply has to fill out the worksheet and that's what's submitted. So this is kind of at a high level where you can go if you're confused about something, but again, you don't have to read everything, so don't get overwhelmed. So again, I just wanted to remind everybody this idea of once approved, not always approved. And there's a potential to get grumpy because I've already done great work. What do you mean? So I just wanted to share this Shunryu Suzuki quote. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind, there are few. So I use this process and invite you all to use it as an invitation to invoke beginner's mind, this idea that I might have done great work 3 years ago, but certification is a living process and I'm going to earn it afresh. And I'm going to put down everything that I knew in my previous cycle, and I'm just going to look at my application with fresh eyes. So I hope you find that to be a valuable exercise. And I think you'll find in most cases that if you've already been successful in a previous year, you'll be doing more tweaking than wholesale change to your submission. But do look at everything sitting in your application with fresh eyes, and likewise do some spring cleaning. We don't touch your documents. So if there's a lot of stuff up there from a prior year that's no longer relevant, by all means take it down. We also don't want to presume or take things down for you because it could be this is the only place that documents are stored, but make sure that you clean out old things that don't belong there anymore. So now I wanted to take people through step by step the process and break it down a little bit more if you have an application in progress or you're reapplying for certification, what that means. So I mentioned that we have 12 categories now rather than 9. And I also mentioned that equity is now category number 1, which is a really important statement for our program because of the primacy of it in terms of what we do at Sustainable CT. It used to not be category number 1. So what that means is if any of you know the action numbers and could sort of recite that my town did 3.1 or 4.7, the year that we moved equity and added the new categories now means that if you previously knew certain numbers, that those have all changed. And it also means that if you have things sitting in your documents, that those, if they're numbered according to the old scheme, will also need to change. So we recognize the work and inconvenience of this, but we have some tools to help you. And for those of you who are applying in the fall, we also have the fellows who can help you with this piece. So we have, as I mentioned, these 13 categories. 2021 was the year that we did our major renumbering. And then in 2022, this year, we only did a very slight renumbering where if we added a new action or moved something around, there might be some small tweaks. So what does that mean for you? It means that if you come to that page I mentioned previously, and you click on updates and past actions, and then go to the action change summaries, there is a renumbering guide. So if you see on the far right, the action renumbering translation guide, it's right there on the bottom right. So you click there and it'll take you to a chart that shows you how to go back and forth and navigate between the numbers. It's also really easy to renumber things on the website. So you can see right here that there's a file. There's the ability to go in and click. There's a button that says rename. You go to where it says document title, and you can type in the newly named document. So you'll click on edit title, it'll pop up and you change the name. So this is an example from Ashford's toolkit where you go in and you change this to 1.1. This won't make or break your application. If you submit great content and we find that one of the numbers is off, don't worry about it. but for the sake of organization, being professional, and since this has a public facing document, we want you to have a product and application you're proud of that the world sees. So we just want to make sure you're aware of this for folks who love attention to detail. So this is the process, and you click update when you're done. So the next piece, I think I mentioned that in the submission requirements, to help streamline, organize, and make it easier to compare across towns, we went through the whole program primarily in 2021, but we've added a few in 2022, and we've put some new worksheets into the submission requirements. So before, where we might have in a really open-ended way said submit documents that tell us about your support local business campaign, it was really unwieldy and difficult to track, and people would sometimes upload large quantities of things, which is great, but we created a worksheet for towns to fill out with really specific questions around a buy local campaign. So in the action change summaries, we laid out all of the different places that there are new worksheets. There's an example on the right of what they look like. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback by towns. It helps the whole process because it's really clear what towns have to submit, and it's helpful for the reviewers in reviewing as well. So in those action change summaries for each year, there is a list of any worksheets we've added. So for example, in a previous year, if you submitted what used to be Action 1.2, Sustainable Purchasing Policy, now Action 2.2, there's a new worksheet that you'd have to fill out to get points. So this is all available for you on the website, and this is what the 2022 list looks like. The third piece is around something called required fields. So folks probably remember when you come onto your dashboard, you're able to select a status. So we mentioned that there's unplanned, planned, or completed, how many points you're going for, submission information, and so on. So each of these green headings that has a little red star next to it is now a required field. Some folks were putting things in blank. So we just wanted you to know that you don't have to fill in every field, but on the far right, you can see what the required fields are: submission information. So what are you applying for? Because some of the actions have multiple components, and for how many points. Time frame for credit, we're going to give it its own explanation shortly, but basically how long ago you did something as a community impacts whether or not you get points. So if, for example, you had an Earth Day celebration a decade ago, that's great, it's valuable, it doesn't have lasting and ongoing impact in the community, though, the way, say, putting solar panels on your municipal building would. So some things get credit, even if they were done a long time ago, and some don't, and we have a scheme for explaining that. You're also required to talk about partners. So we know that it's really hard, it's always been hard to be a leader in municipal government, but in some ways harder than ever. There are so many demands and diminishing resources in some cases. So we know that many of you rely on partners to implement actions. We also want to make sure that since we're a municipal certification program, that towns aren't getting credit for things where they had no involvement. So if, for example, you worked with your council of government and the COG created a regional watershed plan and you submit that for points, that's great. You just have to explain the relationship and what your role as a municipality was, which can be pretty minimal. And then the last part is a survey question. We're collecting data and trying to understand the role of sustainable CT in your work. So you'll see it's just a quick checkbox at the bottom of every action, and you select the appropriate response. All right, we'll keep moving along. When you go to your municipal dashboard, at the top, you see in bright red writing, this application contains action submissions with incomplete fields. And you'll also see under search actions, all the different categories, there's a red one that says incomplete fields. So you can check and see which of your actions you might have missed filling something out, kind of the same way if you're buying something from a website vendor, it'll light up in red. So this is your cue if something is missing. So make sure you take a look before you hit submit. Time frame for credit. So there's going to be a lot of words on these slides, but it's just to make clear in the end what's a really simple concept. So for people that have previously applied to Sustainable CT, you'll remember that every single action had what we called a different look back period. So how many years backward could you look and still get credit for something? So we just used that example of sustainability or Earth Day celebration versus solar panels. And the feedback we got from all of you is it was really confusing. And we agree. And it also meant that we got really caught up in haggling over the dates of things. Was it before this date versus after? So we started fresh with a new concept, and we simplified our time frame for credit scheme. So the concept now is not so much about exactly how many years ago and how many days ago did something happen, and more starting from the premise of whatever it is you're applying for, does it still have ongoing, currently relevant and meaningful impact in your community? So that's the question, that's the overriding principle of time frame for credit. Generally speaking, in some form or another, since certification lasts for 3 years, the goal is to always have towns doing new work, not necessarily such that you've started from scratch, but the whole process of certification is about a refresh, this beginner's mind, and a fresh perspective. So credit's now available for anything you've done in the past 3 years through one of two pathways. So either it's new, meaning you've done it since you last got certified, brand new, it's a new action, or it's rolling, meaning that it's something you did a long time ago, but within the past 3 years, you've done something to revisit it. So if it's a complete streets policy, has somebody looked at your 20-year-old policy that maybe you got points for and asked this question, is this currently relevant and having meaningful impact in the community, and might we make changes to it? So taking things, dusting them off if they've been sitting on the shelf, and having it as an opportunity to refresh. Maybe your decision is it doesn't need to change, but the important thing is that somebody has looked at it within the past 3 years. So now come all of the words and details, and again, don't get overwhelmed by it. I just call it the loophole language, right? Everything is about staying true to these concepts. So we just want to make sure that we're clearly making sure that these concepts are honored through all of these details. So I mentioned new action credit is anything that's been completed within the past 3 years. We've gotten rid of thinking about dates. So it's really simple. If you were doing 2021 certification, which was last year, anything that was completed on or after January 1st, 2018 gets points. For all of you, anything that was completed on or after January 1st, 2019 gets new action credit. This next part, again, embrace the words and the legalese, but if you're applying for recertification in your year of expiration, you can't claim credit under new action credit. So basically, the way this is written, if in 2019 you did an equity toolkit, it's now 2022 and your town is about to expire because certification lasts 3 years, you can't claim new action credit for the toolkit that you submitted in 2019, notwithstanding the fact that it's happened within the past 3 years. So it's the loophole language. If something feels like you shouldn't get credit for it, you're probably right. So that's what that language is referring to. The flip side, this rolling credit piece, so anything that's more than 3 years old, again, this ongoing, currently relevant and meaningful impact. So apologies, I didn't update this from last year, but for 2022 certification, anything that you've done on or before December 31st, 2018 is potentially eligible for rolling credit rather than new credit. And again, we won't talk about the loophole language, but you understand from what I explained in the last slide that new is new and rolling as you've done before. So we have a chart, it's hyperlinked in every action. You'll see in every action, there's something called time frame for credit that's right under the submission requirements that basically categorizes our actions across the left into these different types. So you'll see the first 3 types: an event, a meeting, a training, something that you've built in the community, or another implementation project, or things that are related to data, only new action credit is eligible. So I want to emphasize that, because let's say you did a great complete streets project and you got points for it. If you have new projects, you can get credit again under the Complete Streets action. You built a roundabout, or you changed your streetscape so that there's a sidewalk that is now on a roadway that wasn't before, or there's a wider sidewalk. All of those projects get credit once and then could get credit again, but they have to be new. So that piece is important. And we do have a list of all of the actions that are not eligible for rolling credit, but the idea is that certification is alive and vibrant and rests on communities doing new work to get certified again. Below are all of the things where ongoing credit is available if you revisit things. So plans, websites, checklists need to be looked at, and there needs to be either a statement to say we've looked at them and they still serve us, or you update them. So if you have questions about that as you move through the process, it's hard to get your head around at first, but once you get in, I think you'll find it to be really intuitive. So we're almost there. The next piece is submission requirements. So I mentioned things change a little bit every year. You want to make sure that you update your application to align with any new submission requirements. So this is a sample of what an action overview worksheet looks like. The 2022 one is up. This is not comprehensive. So this is just a summary. The longer write-ups are where you want to go for the details. But at a quick glance, if you want to take a look and see if the submission requirements changed, this will show you what changed from last year to this year. If you have a longer time horizon than 1 year, you'll use some of the other documents that I already shared to start getting your head around what's new in sustainable CT. I also mentioned that there's a way to look in a really detailed sense what's changed from action to action. So in any individual action write-up, at the top of the action write-up, there's a section called Action Updates. And if you click on the hyperlink that says available for comparison, you'll see in track changes what's changed from this year since last year. It's a little bit like those Russian dolls where you could keep going backwards in time. So you'll see on the left, there's the link that says available for comparison. I click on it and it takes me to the prior year. That document also has the link available for comparison. So you can keep going backwards in time and seeing what's changed. If you're a detail person, this will excite you. If you're not, don't do this at all, or maybe have your fellow do it, but it's there if you want it. Finally, the requirement of completing one action in each category. So if you were certified in a year before Sustainable CT had 12 categories, there are going to be new categories where you might not have necessarily pursued actions yet. So Sustainable CT now has 13 categories. Category 13, which is innovation, is optional. If you have something great that your community has done that doesn't fit in any of the other actions, you can submit up to 2 innovation actions, and a lot of your ideas become new actions. So we love it when you do. Beyond that, towns have to do one something in each of these 12 categories. We've thought really carefully. There's something really accessible in every single category. So for example, effective compassionate homelessness prevention is our newest category. We piloted it last year, notwithstanding the fact it was voluntary. We did have 14 communities that pursued actions in that category. It could be as simple as designating someone within your community to be the homelessness prevention liaison and takes a training offered by the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. So there are many examples of actions that are sort of beginner actions that should be pretty achievable. And we have lots of support and technical assistance available from the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness to help municipalities, and many other examples. So if you look at this list and you feel stuck on one of them and feel like something might be hard, we're ready to help you, because there should be something for everyone in each of these categories. And then lastly, we talked about updating action status. So anyone who previously applied to Sustainable CT had their actions marked either approved or must revised. Every year we go through our whole system and we do a big reset, and anything that was marked approved has now been reset to planned. So if you go into your application and say, I thought this had been approved last cycle, it was, and it's very likely to get approved again, but that's your cue to say, I'm going to go and look and see what's changed since last year. I'm going to read through this and make sure that it aligns with the new requirements, that it's numbered correctly, that this is still true for my community, and take that beginner's mind perspective, look with fresh eyes, and then you'll change it back to completed and it'll go through the cycle again. And with some small tweaks, you'll very likely to get approved again if you were approved previously. Hang on, my screen is stuck. There we go. New within the past 2 years, it used to be that the only way to see how you did in a certification cycle was to go on your municipal dashboard. And of course, your municipal dashboard is always changing. People flow in and out. A cycle happens. I just told you anything that was approved, we reset to plan. You might not know, was this something that was approved last cycle, or did it never get submitted because you can't tell anymore? So we started to hand create. It's a lot of work for staff, but it's a labor of love. We started to hand create a spreadsheet at the end of each certification cycle that we'll have emailed you if you've participated recently, that has your certification results. So that way it's a snapshot in time. We also have them all archived. So if a town applied in, say, the spring of 2021 and you've had turnover and you don't know based on looking at your municipal dashboard kind of where you are, we're happy to send any of you, or you might already have access to this manually created spreadsheet. So we did this in 2020 and 2021. Those of you who last applied before then wouldn't have ever had one of these, but we're going to make them for you going forward. So with that, we're here to help. We have an awesome team. I don't have them up here, but you know, we have amazing Sustainable CT fellows that start every June. They're a tremendous resource. They work full-time for 10 weeks, situated in each of the 9 councils of government and supervised by Sustainable CT staff. Their exclusive function, many of you have worked with them before, is to help you with your application. You can do a lot of great groundwork for them this spring, and then they can be at the ready to help you in the summer. Our equity coaches are pictured at the bottom right, and then our staff over to the left. Just so it's not a surprise to anyone, I did want to let folks know that effective April 1st, I'm going to be moving on from Sustainable CT, which is both exciting and bittersweet. But if you go to the Sustainable CT homepage and you know great people that might be interested in joining our team, we now have job postings up for a variety of different positions. So we encourage you to go to sustainableCT.org. You'll see on the homepage a flag that says we're hiring, and please help us recruit great talent to continue the amazing work that's happening. So that's it for my formal presentation. I want to stop now and open up the floor to questions. If anything has come in through the chat, if you could unmute yourselves and just verbalize it so that we all have the benefit of hearing each other, that would be great.
Well, maybe I can start. I'm Steve Wagner from South Windsor.
Hi, Steve. So glad you're here.
And we were a silver, I guess, 3 years ago. And we're now considering whether to reapply. But I have to tell you that we're getting a lot of pushback, especially from staff, on the amount of work it took to prepare that application, collate everything. And it's possible we won't be reapplying simply because of the amount of work. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you can tell us that has happened or we can do to make life simpler or less work.
Yeah, you're not alone. I also don't want to be the only one to answer this question, because there are others that I'm sure are similarly situated and have faced this challenge. So I can say this: the first time is always the most amount of work. From communities that we've heard that have gone through the process subsequently, there's a huge investment in learning the program, understanding the requirements, learning about the actions. So if you've made that investment already to the extent that staff are concerned, I can't say it's not work to reapply. It certainly is. That's what makes the program valuable, going through the process again. But it's significantly less work. I also know that the resources that we offer in the way of equity coaches and fellows for towns that maximally utilize them, they're tremendous. There's a huge range in terms of the extent to which towns engage with those resources. So to the extent that they might not have been maximally utilized, to encourage folks to do so. And I also want to see, Ginny, you're going to be the next to ask your question, but if there are others that might be able to speak to Steve's question about support and the extent of work from your own lived experience. So I see from David Oakes, spread the work out. I'm guilty of taking all of this on myself. Have each member own their respective actions and stay on it. And then use Sustainable CT staff and fellows to the max. They will assist. Thank you, David Oakes from Bristol. Anyone else? And Steve, we're also happy to speak to specific staff members if there are aspects that felt really overwhelming, and see if we can strategize ways to make it easier the second time around.
For us, it's the third time around.
That's right. It's hard to keep track. So, okay, Ginny.
So my question, thank you, Alicia. My question is can we, so after reviewing actions that we took, we're going to be reapplying. After we review actions that we took in 2019 and reported on and completed, can we move those documents, like physically move them from 2019 to 2022?
So anything that you have on your dashboard that you put up in 2019 has been untouched. So there's nothing that you need to move. It's simply all there and it's available for you to modify. So you'd either take things down and upload new documents, or if something looks great as it is and there's nothing else you have to do to the documents, if the numbers changed, you'd rename them. And then those additional fields, like time frame for credit is new since 2019. You'd go in and you'd explain whether this is a new action, or if it's a 2019 action, you'd say this is a rolling action. We looked at this plan or policy and decided no changes were needed, or we've uploaded a new document.
So are you saying that if there's been changes, we need to change it also in 2019? I don't think you're saying that, right?
No. So just so everybody understands, understanding the mechanics of the way our website works might be helpful. So imagine that when we click certify, imagine it's the year 2019, it's certification day. We click certify, you get the letter, congratulations, Mansfield got silver. Our website takes sort of a picture, is I guess the best way to describe it, a picture of your application. So when you go on our website and click view certification report, it took a picture of whatever happened on that day when we clicked certify. And then anything after that gets changed is private, behind the scenes, and is just yours. So if you haven't been onto your dashboard since 2019, it'll match your certification report exactly. But as you start making changes, the certification report that the public sees is untouched. So that'll still look as it was, it's preserved, it's a historic document, and then anything you change is all behind the scenes until certification submission, and only the things that are marked completed we'll see. But that's your play space.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. And I see lots of activity in the chat, more counsel in terms of managing the workload. And then Lenore, do you want to ask your question out loud just so everybody hears it from Deep River?
Sure. So there's a huge range of points possible with many different actions. So if I submit something and think it's worth 50, and will you say, oh no, this is worth 70, or oh no, this is worth 30?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, and Lenore, I'm going to answer with a little bit of backstory just because everyone might not be as familiar with UR in terms of the way actions are drafted. So not all, but most of our actions have different pieces. So I keep going back to complete streets just because it's the example that's top of mind for me. There are a series of steps. You get to pick how many and what you do as a town. And depending on both how hard and how impactful they are, each step along the way has been assigned a certain number of points. So the way sustainable CT applications are graded, it's a very objective process in that it's all or nothing. So if we say sending a representative to a training to learn about complete streets is worth 5 points, and the submission requirements say, tell us who went, what the title of the training was, which organization supported it, the date they went. If all that information is there, the town gets 5 points. If something is missing, you'll get a must revise and 0 points with the opportunity to go back and correct. So as you move through an action, each of them might have 5, 10, 15. Implementing a complete streets policy, which is a lot of work for those who have done it, is worth 20. So it should be pretty clear when you go to submit how many points you're submitting for, because you'll tell us, I sent a representative to a complete streets training, that's 5 points. I'm submitting my complete streets policy, that's 20. So I'm submitting for 25 points. So we'll then evaluate. Now, there are instances where a town might get points for one piece and not the other because they met the submission requirements for one piece and not the other, or they might have submitted a bunch of information for something and forgot to tell us they were seeking points. So the amount that a town requests can differ from the amount that a town actually gets approved. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understood this concept of all or nothing, that there's assigned points for each piece and you either get them all or you don't. So I don't know if that clarifies for folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. What else? Or maybe you're just integrating because that was a lot of information. So something else that I want to tell folks, since we do have a couple of minutes, but you should interrupt me. And Dave helped, bring this to my attention, this idea. He wrote, I'm dying to know about the review period, and we'll talk about gold standards in a minute. So a little bit of the behind the scenes of the process. So April 5th will come. You'll submit whatever it is you have if you feel ready to do that. And we recruit reviewers for every single action in the program. And they're all subject matter experts in the field. They tend to be members of COGs, of state agencies, of nonprofits, but all sitting places with somewhat of a neutral bent, and we navigate conflicts of interest with our reviewers because everyone lives in a town and there's a possibility of a town submitting. So the review process then begins, and each action has its own reviewer. So if Mansfield submits its application, there's not one reviewer that looks at Mansfield's whole application and a different reviewer looking at Vernon's. There'll be one reviewer that looks at every single complete street submission across all of the applications, and then a different reviewer that looks at the materials management action, and so on. So that's our process. They're all volunteers. It runs for about 2 weeks, and then we have what we call our staff quality control process. So members of the Sustainable CT team will then read every single review that reviewers wrote. And if we see something problematic, a reviewer gave points when they shouldn't have, we'll make corrections. So basically every application gets 2 reads, one by a volunteer expert, one by staff. We'll then tally everything up because it's done in this piecemeal way. We have no idea how things will shake out. We don't know if your town will have hit the 200, the 400. If you have the equity toolkits, you don't. And our municipal certification committee has come up with a policy with a couple of different measures. But broadly speaking, if you're close, and there's definition around what close means, you're closer than 40 points, you're not missing more than 2 categories, and so on. If you meet our definition of close, we'll then contact you at that point in the process. And we'll say, you're really close to being certified, but you're 20 points off and you're missing 1 category. But if you fix A, B, and C, you'll get there. So we do have a period of time for invited revisions so that nobody is left behind if they are close. So then almost a second certification process happens where we re-review and we re-look at everything. It goes through several votes with our municipal certification committee and board. So it's we move at what feels like a breakneck speed to us and what's probably agonizingly long for you, but it's anywhere from 2 to 2.5 months from submission time to when you get results and we announce certified communities. And I also want folks to know, if you don't get certified, it's not a failure. This is a process, and spring and fall are each moments for a town to just kind of get a sense of where they are. If you achieve certification, great. If not, you'll simply get a bunch of revisions sent back to you, most of which are very achievable, and you'll be successful in the fall. So know that we're with you and we very much want you to succeed. So that's our process, and I just wanted to share so that you all know. Okay. Thanks for all the gratitude in the chat. That's great. Okay. Awesome. Are there any more questions aside from what seems a burning desire for people to know about gold?
Clifford has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't see the raised hand. Go ahead, Cliff, or Clifford, however you like to be called.
The street lights seem to me to be like solar panels, and I would have thought that there would be rolling credit, but as I think I saw it on our spreadsheet, they're not.
Yeah, it's a good point. We're still learning too. So the broad thinking in all of this, which we're open to continuing to refine, is that technology with respect to streetlights is always changing, right? We went through a period of time where incandescent was what we had, and then LED associated with certain standards. So the thinking and having it be a one-time point action is that at that moment in time, those were the appropriate technical standards, but we can't presume that that technology makes sense in perpetuity. So the thought is, when an upgrade happens, towns get awarded points that once, and then in the future, because as technology invariably changes and at some point there'll be a new standard or a more efficient bulb, and we're already hearing that those changes are underway, that at the next upgrade, more points would be awarded. So that's the thinking, but it's certainly open to debate.
Yeah, you're not going to do something like that year after year. When you make an investment like that, you're certainly going to stick with it for a few years.
For sure.
And if we have a lot of categories that we're barred from because we've already done it, it makes it harder to fulfill the requirements for each category, at which point, if you have one category you can't do, you're out. So it's a problem.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's one that we're very sensitive to, especially in the smaller towns. So as you work through the process, if any of you run into that scenario where there's an implementation project where you had a significant investment and you feel like there is no other pathway for you in the category, that's not our intention. We want to see everybody succeed. So make sure you contact us and let's have a conversation about it, because our program changes every year through this kind of feedback. And it could be that next year that's not the case. We want to learn from you. So thank you for sharing and naming that, because it's important. Margaret, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I just have a sort of a random question for the group or anybody who is currently active in their town with Sustainable CT. In the November election cycle, this past one, we got some pushback politically about Sustainable CT and imposing bureaucracy and whatnot. And I just wondered if anybody else had that experience in their town, and any thoughts about responses? Thanks.
Thanks for asking your question. What do folks think? Speak up.
Maybe ask them to participate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The pushback that we get is on our own committee that's doing this. We're always trying to make sure that we're not just ticking boxes and trying to go through getting, the certification itself isn't what's important. It's the sustainability that's important. And so we keep trying to keep the focus on, what's good for the town, what's good for the state, what's good for the country. And it's not about the bureaucracy of all of this and ticking off boxes. It's about working on sustainability.
For sure, Clifford, thanks. It was just a surprise when it came out, and we've sort of thought, we better think about this for a minute. Should we be offended? Should we be upset? And I think, Clifford, you're right. The answer is focus on what good comes out of the program for everybody. Yeah.
By the way, I just want to note, we're going to keep going because as long as there are questions, I'm going to stay, but it is 11 o'clock. So if anybody has a hard stop, we honor that. Feel free to head off, and we're thrilled that you're here, and thank you for coming, but we're going to keep going for those who have time and interest. So Diane, I see your hand up.
Yes, hi, and thank you for this. Really, everybody on this call are leaders unto themselves, and the staff at your group, the Sustainable CT, is terrific. In answer to what Margaret Hunt had mentioned, what came to mind right away was, as we do these different measures, keeping a running tally of how much we are saving in tax dollars, how much we are gaining in grants, could help push or rebut accusations of what Margaret had mentioned during an election cycle. And right now, towns are doing their budgets. I think it's a great opportunity for us to see whether Sustainable CT's principles are being built into their operating and capital budgets right now. And in many cases, it is not in the towns that don't have an active sustainability committee. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. But thanks so much for today.
Thank you, Diane. Other thoughts or questions or things that call to be shared? Okay, well, this isn't the last opportunity, quite the contrary. This is the first opportunity, which we hope will be of many, where we want to hear from you, support you as you move through this process. The world can feel kind of heavy sometimes. So we started off, for those of you who signed on not right at the beginning, we started off with some inspiration where we asked people to type into the chat what inspires you, why you're doing this work, why you're motivated. So if you've not had the opportunity to do that yet, you're welcome. I do want to close. So I love what I do, but it's very technical, right? Like, it's not fun to talk about click here and do this and calculate this many years for your look back. So I just want to end with a note of inspiration. For those of you who are not familiar with the 13th century mystical poet Hafiz, I came across this poem the other day about dancing your life. So I'm just going to remind everybody by reading. I sometimes forget that I was created for joy. My mind is too busy, my heart is too heavy for me to remember that I have been called to dance the sacred dance of life. I was created to smile, to love, to be lifted up, and to lift others up. Untangle my feet from all that ensnares and free my soul that we might dance and that our dancing might be contagious. So I invite you all to dance the rest of your day, and that your dancing may be contagious through Sustainable CT and everything else that you do. And thank you all for the work that you do, and thank you for being here. And thanks for all of the well wishes. I'm not going yet. So I'm here till March 31st, and I'm not leaving Connecticut. So I hope that we all continue to work together in other ways. And to answer the question, I don't know what I'm doing yet, which is really exciting. So I'm falling into the unknown. But we'll see where my opportunities take me. So, all right. Thanks everyone for being here, and have a great day.
Thank you,
Bye.
Alyssa.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Wow.
Bye, thank you.